She knew she was walking into a trap, but desperation makes people do crazy things. Elena Faulkner stood outside the glass towers of Whitmore Tech, clutching her worn leather portfolio against her chest like armor. The September morning air bit at her cheeks, but the real chill came from the story she'd heard. 23 assistants in 6 months, none lasting more than a week. The rumors painted Leonard Whitmore as a corporate monster, brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely impossible to work with. But Elena needed this job. Her mother's hospital bills weren't going to pay themselves. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to Judgment Day. Her reflection in the polished steel doors showed a young woman trying too hard to look professional. Auburn hair twisted into a bun that was already coming loose, freckles scattered across pale skin, and blue eyes that betrayed every nervous thought racing through her mind. The receptionist barely looked up. "You must be the new assistant. Mr. Whitmore is in the conference room. 3rd door on your right. And honey?" She finally raised her eyes, sympathy flickering across her features. "Don't take it personally when it doesn't work out." Elena's heels clicked against the marble floor as she navigated the pristine hallway. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she caught glimpses of Leonard Whitmore commanding a room full of executives. Even from a distance, his presence was magnetic, platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, the kind of sharp jawline that belonged on magazine covers, and a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. He was speaking in measured tones, gesturing with surgical precision, every movement calculated, every word weighted. This was a man who had never known chaos, never stumbled, never needed to improvise his way out of anything. Elena took a deep breath and knocked. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward the door as it opened, but only one pair mattered. Leonard Whitmore's gaze was steel gray and assessing, the kind of look that could dissect a person's worth in seconds. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Elena Faulkner from Prestige Staffing. I'm here to—" Her words died as her portfolio chose that exact moment to burst open. Papers scattered across the conference room like confetti, financial reports mixing with coffee-stained resumes. Elena's face burned crimson as she dropped to her knees, frantically gathering the mess while a room full of millionaires watched in stunned silence. "I'm so sorry, the class must have— I can explain— Everyone out." Leonard's voice cut through her babbling like a blade. The executives filed out without a word, leaving Elena alone with the man who could make or break her future. She remained on the floor, still collecting papers, when perfectly polished Italian leather shoes appeared in her line of vision. "Look at me." Elena's head snapped up. From her position on the floor, Leonard Whitmore looked like a titan, tall, imposing, and utterly unreadable. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the disheveled papers to her chest. "I know what you're thinking," she said quickly. "This isn't exactly the professional first impression you were hoping for. But I swear, I'm not usually this— How long have you been out of work?" The question caught her off guard. 3 months. But I have references and my typing speed is— Why do you need this job?" Elena blinked. She'd expected questions about software proficiency or scheduling experience, not this. The honest answer stuck in her throat. "My mother is dying, and I'm drowning in medical debt." But something in his eyes told her he'd see through any polite lie. "Because I have to," she said simply. Leonard studied her for a long moment. In the silence, Elena became acutely aware of the city humming 42 floors below, of the way the morning light caught the silver threads in his perfectly tailored suit, of the fact that her future hung in the balance of whatever calculation was happening behind those gray eyes. Finally, he moved to his desk and picked up a thick folder. "My last assistant quit via text message at 2 in the morning, he said, not looking at her. "The one before that had a panic attack during a board meeting. The one before that simply stopped showing up. Do you know why?" Elena shook her head. "Because they were afraid of me." He turned, and for just a moment something flickered across his features. Not quite vulnerability, but perhaps the shadow of it. "Are you afraid of me, Elena Faulkner?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena looked at this man who had built an empire, who commanded rooms full of executives who had never known failure. She thought of her mother's tired smile, of the stack of bills on her kitchen table, of the fact that she'd already lost everything that mattered. "No," she said quietly. "I'm afraid of losing." The corner of Leonard's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Be here at 7 tomorrow morning. We'll see if you're still not afraid after day 1. As Elena gathered her things and headed for the door, She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something much more complicated than a job. She was probably right to be nervous, but for reasons she couldn't even imagine yet. Elena arrived at 6:45 a.m. determined to prove she wasn't just another casualty waiting to happen. The Whitmore Tech lobby was already buzzing with early morning energy. Executives in expensive suits clutching coffee like lifelines, delivery personnel wheeling in packages, and the soft hum of a billion-dollar empire awakening. Elena had spent the night researching everything she could find about Leonard Whitmore, MIT graduate at 19, built his first company by 25, sold it for $200 million by 30. The business magazines called him the Ice King of Silicon Valley. What they didn't mention was the way his jaw tightened when he was thinking, or how his fingers drummed against his desk when he was irritated. Elena had noticed these details yesterday, and she wasn't sure why they mattered. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave her time to practice her professional smile. Today would be different. Today, she wouldn't trip, spill, or scatter important documents across expensive marble floors. The universe apparently had other plans. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," Elena announced as she entered his office, coffee in one hand, his schedule in the other. "I've reviewed your appointments for today, and I think there might be a scheduling conflict between the Henderson merger meeting and the quarterly review with—" Her heel caught the edge of the Persian rug. Time slowed as Elena felt herself falling forward, the coffee cup flying from her hand in a perfect arc. She watched in horror as dark liquid splashed across Leonard's pristine white shirt, soaking through the expensive fabric to his skin beneath. He sat frozen at his desk, coffee dripping from his chin onto the contract he'd been reviewing. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "I am so sorry," Elena whispered, grabbing tissues from his desk and reaching toward him before catching herself. "I can pay for dry cleaning, or replacement, or—" "Stop." Leonard's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. He stood slowly, coffee still dripping from his shirt, and Elena braced herself for the inevitable dismissal. This was it. Day one, and she'd managed to assault her boss with hot beverages. But instead of anger, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Amusement. "In 6 months?" he said, unbuttoning his ruined shirt with methodical precision. 23 assistants have quit, been fired, or simply vanished. None of them ever had the audacity to throw coffee at me. Elena's mouth fell open. "I didn't throw it, You're the first person to actually make physical contact with me in this office." Leonard walked to a closet Elena hadn't noticed before, revealing a row of identical shirts hanging in perfect formation. Most people are too terrified to get within 3 feet. As he slipped on a fresh shirt, Elena caught a glimpse of lean muscle beneath the fabric, a small scar just below his left shoulder blade. For a moment, he looked less like an untouchable billionaire and more like a man. Just a man who happened to keep spare shirts in his office because he'd learned to prepare for every contingency. Except, apparently, for Elena. "I should fire you," he said, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced efficiency. "Yes, sir. Any reasonable person would fire you." "Absolutely, sir. But apparently I'm not feeling particularly reasonable this morning." Leonard sat back down, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "The Henderson meeting is at 10. The quarterly review is at 10:30. You're right about the conflict." Elena blinked. "I am? Fix it." She stood there for a moment, certain she'd misheard, but Leonard had already turned his attention back to his computer, dismissing her with the casual efficiency of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. Elena hurried to her desk outside his office, mind racing. The Henderson meeting was with potential investors from the East Coast, billionaires who'd flown in specifically for this appointment. The quarterly review was with his board of directors, people who could make or break company strategy with a single vote. Moving either meeting would be like juggling dynamite. She spent the next hour on the phone, sweet-talking assistants, rearranging schedules, and calling in favors she didn't even know she had. By 9 a.m. she'd managed to shift the Henderson meeting to 2 p.m. and convince the board to accept a working lunch instead of their traditional conference room setup. "Done," she announced, poking her head into Leonard's office. He looked up from his computer. "The Henderson Group? Moved to 2 p.m. They weren't thrilled, but I mentioned that you'd personally ensure they had first look at the new biotech acquisition. And the board? Working lunch in the executive dining room at 12:30. I took the liberty of ordering from that Italian place on 5th Street, the one that does the truffle risotto you ordered last month." Leonard's fingers stopped moving across his keyboard. He turned to face her fully, and Elena felt the weight of his complete attention. How did you know about the risotto? Heat crept up Elena's neck. I pay attention. To what? To you. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and Elena felt her cheeks burn. I mean to your preferences. For work purposes. Obviously. Something shifted in Leonard's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. For a moment, the mask of corporate efficiency slipped, and Elena glimpsed something deeper underneath. Something that looked almost lonely. Elena. Yes, sir? Next time you want to get my attention, just knock. She was still trying to figure out if that was a joke when her phone rang. As she hurried to answer it, she caught Leonard watching her through his glass office wall, his expression unreadable but no longer cold, and Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just passed some kind of test she didn't even know she was taking. By Thursday, Elena had survived longer than anyone expected, including herself. The office dynamics had shifted in subtle ways. Colleagues who'd initially looked at her with pity now watched with curious respect. The receptionist, Marissa, had started saving Elena the good coffee from the executive break room. Even the security guards downstairs knew her by name. But it was Leonard who puzzled her most. He'd taken to leaving small tests throughout her day, a deliberately vague email requiring interpretation, a schedule that needed creative problem-solving, a client call that demanded quick thinking. Each challenge felt like a question. Are you paying attention? Can you keep up? Will you crumble under pressure? Elena refused to crumble. Mr. Whitmore? She knocked on his office door frame, holding a tablet with his afternoon schedule. The Patterson Industries call has been moved to 3:30, and I've prepared talking points for the Morrison contract negotiation. Leonard glanced up from his computer, and Elena noticed something different about his expression. The perpetual frost in his gray eyes had thawed slightly, replaced by something that looked almost like curiosity. The Morrison points? 3 key leverage areas, Elena said, stepping into his office. They need our software integration more than they're letting on. Their stock dropped 12% after the security breach last month. They're desperate for a solution that makes them look competent again. And the other 2? Elena moved closer to his desk, unaware that she was the first person in months to approach Leonard without visible nervousness. Their CEO, Robert Morrison, just got divorced. Expensive divorce. He needs this deal to close before the quarterly earnings report, or his board might start asking uncomfortable questions about his judgment. Leonard leaned back in his chair, studying her. How do you know about the divorce? His assistant mentioned it when I called to confirm the meeting time. She sounded stressed, said something about everything falling apart at once. I put 2 and 2 together. And the third leverage point? Elena hesitated for just a moment. You don't actually need this contract. Morrison Industries would be a nice addition to your portfolio, but Whitmore Tech is profitable enough without them. They know it, and they know you know it. That gives you all the power in the room. The silence that followed felt charged with electricity. Leonard stood slowly, walking around his desk until he was close enough that Elena could smell his cologne. Something expensive and understated like cedar and rain. Elena. Yes, sir? Stop calling me sir. She blinked. What should I call you? Leonard. His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. When it's just us, call me Leonard. Something fluttered in Elena's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with professional accomplishment. Standing this close to him, she could see tiny details that humanized the corporate titan. A small scar near his left temple, probably from childhood. The way his jaw tensed slightly when he was thinking deeply. How his perfectly styled hair had one stubborn piece that wanted to fall forward no matter how much product he used. Leonard, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. He smiled then, not the polished, media-ready smile she'd seen in magazine photos, but something real and spontaneous that transformed his entire face. Much better. Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming call, breaking the moment. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. I should take this, she said quickly, backing toward the door. Elena, wait. But she was already gone, fleeing to her desk with her heart hammering against her ribs. The call was from St. Mary's Hospital, and Elena knew without answering what they wanted to discuss. Hello, this is Elena. Miss Faulkner, this is Dr. Rodriguez. We need to discuss your mother's treatment options. The insurance company has denied coverage for the new medication we discussed, and without it, Elena sank into her chair, pressing the phone tightly against her ear, as the doctor explained numbers that might as well have been astronomical distances. $50,000. That's what it would take to give her mother a fighting chance. $50,000 she didn't have. Through Leonard's glass office wall, she could see him watching her with concern. Elena turned away, not wanting him to see the tears threatening to spill over. She'd been so careful to keep her personal life separate from work, but the walls she'd built were crumbling. "I understand, Doctor. Can I have a few days to figure something out?" After she hung up, Elena sat staring at her computer screen without seeing it. She'd been so focused on proving herself professionally that she'd almost forgotten why she needed this job in the first place. Her mother was running out of time, and Elena was running out of options. A soft knock on her desk made her look up. Leonard stood there holding 2 cups of coffee, his usual commanding presence somehow gentler. "You looked like you could use this," he said, setting 1 cup in front of her. Elena wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, grateful for something to hold on to. "Thank you." Leonard didn't return to his office. Instead, he leaned against her desk, studying her with those perceptive gray eyes. "Bad news?" Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Family?" Another nod. Leonard was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could practically hear the calculations happening in his brilliant mind. Finally, he spoke. "Whatever it is, Elena, you don't have to face it alone." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her completely. Elena looked up at him, this man who was supposed to be cold and unreachable, and saw something that made her breath catch. He actually cared, and that realization was more terrifying than any deadline or difficult client could ever be. Some conversations happen in the space between what's said and what's understood. Elena spent Friday morning pretending everything was normal. She answered emails with her usual efficiency, scheduled meetings with her characteristic attention to detail, and smiled at colleagues who passed her desk. But Leonard wasn't fooled. He'd been watching her all morning through his glass office walls, the way she rubbed her temples when she thought no one was looking, how she stared at her phone screen a beat too long before answering calls, the slight tremor in her hands when she delivered his coffee. At 11:30, Elena knocked on his door with quarterly reports that needed his signature. "Come in," Leonard called, not looking up from his computer. Elena entered and placed the documents on his desk with mechanical precision. "The Morrison Industries meeting went well. They've agreed to our terms and contracts should be ready for review by Monday." "Good." Leonard signed the first document, then glanced up. "How's your mother?" The question caught Elena off guard. She'd been so careful not to bring her personal life into the office, but somehow Leonard had seen right through her professional mask. Elena's voice caught. "She's fighting." Leonard set down his pen and gave her his full attention. "What kind of fighting?" Elena hesitated. Every instinct told her to deflect, to maintain the professional boundary between boss and employee. But something in Leonard's eyes, a gentleness she'd never seen before, made her walls crumble. "Lung cancer," she said quietly. "Stage 3. The doctors say there's a new treatment that could help, but..." She trailed off, unable to voice the impossible numbers. "But it's expensive." Elena nodded, blinking back tears. "I know I shouldn't be thinking about this at work. I'm sorry if I've been distracted." Leonard stood and walked around his desk, stopping just close enough that Elena could see the concern etched in his features. "Elena, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, and the compassion she found there nearly broke her resolve completely. "How much?" he asked simply. "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Leonard's voice was firm but gentle. "How much?" Elena shook her head. "It's not that simple. It's not just about the money. It's about everything. The treatments, the uncertainty, the fact that I might lose her anyway and then I'd owe you." "Elena." Leonard's voice stopped her spiraling thoughts. "How much?" $50,000, she whispered. Leonard didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't treat it like the impossible sum it was to someone like Elena. "Consider it done." Elena stared at him in shock. "What?" "I'll have accounting transfer the funds to whatever account you need. Today." "Leonard, I can't accept that. It's too much and we barely know each other and I don't even know if the treatment will work." "Then we'll find out together." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way Leonard was looking at her, like she mattered, like her pain was his pain, like the distance between boss and employee had dissolved into something far more dangerous. "Why?" she whispered. Leonard was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. "Because," he said finally, "in 20 years of business, you're the first person who's ever made me want to be better than I am." Elena's breath caught. "Leonard," I've spent my entire adult life building walls, he continued, moving closer, keeping people at a distance, staying safe, but you, he paused, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. You make me want to tear them all down. Elena could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. Standing this close to Leonard, she could see the vulnerability he kept hidden beneath his corporate armor. This wasn't the untouchable billionaire the media wrote about. This was a man who'd been alone for so long, he'd forgotten what connection felt like. I make you want to tear down walls? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Leonard's hand reached up, almost touching her face before he caught himself. You make me want to remember what it feels like to be human. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they were ready to cross. Elena could feel the pull of something deeper than professional respect, something that had been building since that first day when she'd scattered papers across his conference room floor. This is complicated, she said. I know. I work for you. I know. People will talk. Let them. Elena looked into Leonard's eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. Hope. Raw, unguarded hope from a man who'd probably forgotten how to hope for anything beyond the next quarterly profit margin. What happens now? She asked. Leonard's smile was soft, almost shy. Now we take your mother to the best oncologist in the city. And then, he paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. Then we figure out what this is between us. Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming text, breaking the spell. She glanced at it automatically, then looked back at Leonard with wonder. You already transferred the money. I told you I would. But we were still talking. You did it while we were... Elena. Leonard's voice was gentle but firm. I don't make promises I can't keep. As Elena looked at this man who'd just changed her entire world with a few keystrokes, she realized she was in deeper trouble than she'd ever imagined. Because somewhere between the spilled coffee and the quarterly reports, she'd started falling for Leonard Whitmore, and from the way he was looking at her, she was pretty sure he was falling too. The weekend changed everything, even though nothing happened at all. Elena spent Saturday at St. Mary's Hospital with her mother, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time in months. The new medication was already working. Her breathing was easier, her color better. Dr. Rodriguez had been cautiously optimistic, using words like promising and significant improvement, all because of Leonard. Elena found herself thinking about him in ways that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or conference calls. She remembered the exact moment his expression had softened when she'd told him about her mother, the way his voice had dropped to something almost tender when he'd said she made him want to be human again. By Monday morning, Elena had convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. Billionaire CEOs didn't fall for clumsy assistants. Men like Leonard Whitmore collected supermodels and socialites, not red-headed disasters who spilled coffee on important documents. But when she walked into the office at 7 a.m., Leonard was already there, standing by the window that overlooked the city. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a perfectly pressed suit. Instead, he'd rolled up his shirt sleeves, loosened his tie, and there was something different about his posture, less rigid, more accessible. Good morning, Elena said softly, not wanting to break whatever spell had settled over the office. Leonard turned, and his smile was immediate and warm. How's your mother? Better. Much better. Elena's voice caught with emotion. The doctors say the treatment is working faster than they expected. I'm glad. They stood looking at each other across the office, and Elena felt that same electric tension from Friday humming between them. Leonard took a step toward her, then seemed to catch himself. Elena, we should talk about... Mr. Whitmore? Marissa's voice crackled through the intercom. Your 9 o'clock appointment is here early. The Patterson Industries Board? Leonard's jaw tightened with frustration. Send them to conference room A, I'll be right there. As he moved toward the door, he paused next to Elena. We are not finished with this conversation. The promise in his voice sent heat spiraling through Elena's chest. The Patterson meeting ran long, bleeding into Leonard's 10 o'clock and pushing his entire schedule back by 2 hours. Elena spent the morning fielding calls from irritated executives and rearranging appointments with the diplomatic skill of a UN negotiator. By noon, she was exhausted but triumphant. She'd managed to salvage Leonard's afternoon schedule without offending anyone important, a minor miracle that would have been impossible a week ago. You're getting good at this, Leonard said, appearing at her desk with 2 sandwiches from the deli down the street. Turkey and Swiss, no mayo, light mustard. Elena stared at him. How did you know? I pay attention too. The simple statement carried more weight than it should have. Elena looked at this man who controlled billion-dollar corporations and somehow found time to remember her lunch preferences and felt something dangerous flutter in her chest. Leonard, about what happened Friday. Eat first, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Then we talk. They ate in comfortable silence, stealing glances at each other like teenagers with a secret. The office buzzed around them with its usual Monday energy, but Elena felt insulated from it all, existing in a bubble that contained only her and Leonard, and the growing awareness that they were about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. The Patterson deal went well, Leonard said eventually. I heard. Congratulations. It wouldn't have happened without you. The way you handled the scheduling crisis this morning, my last 3 assistants would have had nervous breakdowns. Elena smiled. I'm tougher than I look. I'm beginning to realize that. Leonard's voice was quiet, intense. You're full of surprises, Elena Faulkner. Good surprises or bad surprises? The best kind. Leonard leaned forward, his gray eyes holding hers. The kind that change everything. Elena's breath caught. The space between them felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Leonard, I know what you're going to say. This is complicated. We work together. People will talk. I've been thinking about all of that all weekend. And? Leonard stood, moving around her desk until he was close enough to touch. And I realized I don't care about any of it as much as I care about you. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. You barely know me. I know you're brilliant. I know you're brave. I know you love your mother enough to work for the most difficult boss in the city just to pay her medical bills. Leonard's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I know you make me want things I thought I'd forgotten how to want. What kind of things? Leonard's hand reached up, fingers barely brushing her cheek. Someone to come home to. Someone who sees past the money and the reputation. Someone who throws coffee at me and makes me laugh instead of making me want to fire them. Elena leaned into his touch, her resolve crumbling. This is crazy. Probably. We could both lose everything. Or we could gain something neither of us knew we were looking for. Elena looked into Leonard's eyes and saw her own reflection. Hope mixed with terror. Want tangled with wisdom. This man had saved her mother's life, had seen through her professional mask to the woman underneath, had made her feel valued in ways that had nothing to do with her typing speed or organizational skills. What happens if this doesn't work? She whispered. Leonard's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. What happens if it does? Before Elena could answer, Leonard's phone rang, shattering the moment like glass. He pulled back with visible reluctance, checking the caller ID. I have to take this, he said apologetically. But Elena? Yes? This conversation isn't over. Tonight. Dinner. Just us. It wasn't a question, but Elena nodded anyway, her heart racing with the knowledge that everything was about to change. As Leonard walked back to his office, Elena touched her cheek where his fingers had been, and wondered if she was brave enough to fall in love with a man who could either save her or destroy her. She was about to find out. Elena changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple navy dress that made her eyes look deeper blue. She'd never been nervous about dinner before, but then again, she'd never had dinner with a man who could buy small countries as a hobby. Leonard had texted her an address, a quiet Italian restaurant in Brooklyn that felt worlds away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. When Elena arrived, she found Leonard already waiting at a corner table, and her breath caught. Gone was the corporate titan in his perfect suits. This Leonard wore dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that made his eyes look silver in the dim lighting. His usually perfect hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his fingers through it nervously. He looked human. You look beautiful, he said as she approached, standing to pull out her chair. Elena felt heat bloom in her cheeks. You clean up pretty well yourself. As they settled into their seats, Elena noticed the little details that made this place special. Candles flickering on checkered tablecloths, the scent of garlic and fresh basil, an elderly Italian woman behind the counter, who smiled at Leonard like she'd known him for years. You come here often? Elena asked. My grandmother used to bring me here when I was little, Leonard said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, before she died, before everything got complicated. Elena heard the story hidden in those words. A lonely boy who'd lost the one person who'd truly seen him. What was she like? Leonard's smile was wistful, fierce, stubborn. She never let me get away with anything, not even when I started making more money than she'd ever dreamed of. He paused, looking at Elena with something like wonder. She would have liked you? What makes you say that? She always said the best people are the ones who aren't afraid to make messes, who choose love over comfort even when it's harder. Elena's heart skipped. Is that what I do? Every day. Leonard reached across the table, his fingers finding hers. You chose your mother over financial security. You chose to stay and fight at the office when every sane person would have run. You choose courage, Elena, even when you're terrified. Elena looked down at their joined hands, her pale skin against his, her freckles stark against his elegant fingers. I don't feel very courageous. That's what makes you brave. The waiter approached and Leonard ordered for both of them in fluent Italian, his voice carrying the musical rhythm of someone who'd learned the language from love, not lessons. Elena watched him speak and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the cold billionaire from the magazines. This was a man with hidden depths, with stories and scars and a grandmother who'd taught him about choosing love. Tell me about your father, Leonard said after the waiter left. Elena's throat tightened. What do you want to know? Everything. Anything. I want to know who taught you to be so fearless. Elena smiled sadly. He died when I was 12. Car accident. But before that, she paused, remembering. He was a paramedic. Used to say that the worst day of someone's life could become the best day, depending on who showed up to help. Is that why you stayed? When I was impossible to work with? Maybe. Or maybe I just recognized someone who was hurting and trying really hard not to show it. Leonard's grip on her hand tightened. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been there. They talked through 3 courses, sharing stories that had nothing to do with stock prices or board meetings. Elena learned that Leonard had taught himself to cook because eating alone in restaurants felt too pathetic. He discovered that Elena had once wanted to be a teacher, but had changed majors when her father died because she needed something more financially stable. Do you ever regret it? He asked as they shared tiramisu that was sinfully good. Which part? Not becoming a teacher? Giving up your dream? Elena considered this. I used to, but now I think maybe dreams change. Maybe the thing you thought you wanted isn't always the thing you actually need. What do you need, Elena? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Elena looked at this man who'd saved her mother's life, who'd seen past her professional mask to the woman underneath, who'd brought her to his grandmother's favorite restaurant and told her stories he'd probably never shared with anyone. I need, she said carefully, to know that this is real, not just gratitude for what you did for my mother, or some kind of workplace fantasy. Leonard set down his fork, giving her his complete attention. What would convince you it's real? Elena's breath caught at the intensity in his voice. I don't know. Leonard stood abruptly, dropping money on the table. Come with me. Outside, the autumn air was crisp with the promise of winter. Leonard led her down a quiet street lined with brownstones, their footsteps echoing on the sidewalk. Elena walked beside him, acutely aware of the space between them, close enough to feel his warmth, far enough to maintain the pretense that this was still just dinner between boss and employee. Where are we going? Somewhere I've never taken anyone before. They stopped in front of a small park Elena hadn't noticed before, just a patch of grass with a few benches and a fountain that had seen better days. Leonard sat on one of the benches, patting the space beside him. This is where I come when everything else gets too loud, he said as Elena settled next to him. When the board meetings and the acquisitions and the constant performance of being Leonard Whitmore gets to be too much. Elena looked around the unremarkable little park. It's perfect. That's what I thought you'd say. Leonard turned to face her, his expression serious. Elena, I need you to understand something. What I feel for you, it has nothing to do with gratitude or convenience or any kind of workplace dynamics. It's about the fact that when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before I learned to protect myself from everything. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Leonard, I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. And it terrifies me because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be vulnerable or open or any of the things you deserve, but I want to learn. Elena stared at him, this powerful man who'd just handed her his heart like it was the most fragile thing in the world. What if I hurt you? She whispered. Leonard's smile was soft and sad and hopeful all at once. Then at least I'll have been brave enough to let you try. As Elena looked into his eyes, she realized she was standing at the edge of a cliff. She could step back, keep things safe and professional and uncomplicated, or she could jump, trusting that Leonard would catch her. The choice, she realized, had already been made somewhere between the spilled coffee and the gentle way he'd touched her face that afternoon. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. Leonard's intake of breath was sharp and sudden, as if he'd been holding it without realizing. Then his hands were cupping her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones, and Elena knew with absolute certainty that her life had just divided into two parts, before this moment and everything that would come after. But before Leonard could kiss her, Elena's phone buzzed with an emergency notification that would change everything they thought they knew about their future together. The text message shattered their perfect moment like a stone through glass. Elena's phone screen lit up with words that made her blood turn to ice. "Elena, it's Dr. Rodriguez. Your mother has taken a turn for the worse. Please come to the hospital immediately." "I have to go," Elena whispered, already standing. Leonard was beside her instantly, his hand steady on her back. "What happened?" "My mom. Something's wrong." Elena's voice cracked as she fumbled with her phone, trying to call the hospital with shaking fingers. "Come on," Leonard said, flagging down a taxi. "We'll go together." The ride to St. Mary's Hospital passed in a blur of city lights and Elena's barely contained panic. Leonard held her hand in the back seat, his thumb tracing circles across her knuckles in a rhythm that was probably meant to be soothing, but only reminded Elena of how quickly everything could fall apart. Dr. Rodriguez met them in the waiting room, his expression grave. Elena's heart sank before he even spoke. "Miss Faulkner, I'm afraid the cancer has spread faster than we anticipated. Despite the positive response to the initial treatment, there are new tumors in her liver and brain. We're looking at weeks, maybe days." Elena felt the world tilt sideways. "But she was doing better. You said the treatment was working." "It was. But sometimes cancer is unpredictable. I'm so sorry." Elena sank into a plastic chair that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Leonard sat beside her, his presence solid and warm. But even he couldn't fix this. "Can I see her?" Elena asked. "Of course. She's been asking for you." Elena's mother looked small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical efficiency. But her eyes were clear when Elena entered, and her smile was the same one that had comforted Elena through childhood nightmares and teenage heartbreaks. "There's my beautiful girl," Margaret Faulkner said, her voice weak but warm. Elena took her mother's hand, fighting back tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I was out at dinner while you were—" "Stop." Margaret's voice carried the authority of a woman who'd raised a daughter alone and had no patience for self-pity. "I'm glad you were out. Having dinner with someone special, I hope?" Elena glanced toward the door where Leonard waited in the hallway, giving them privacy but close enough to offer support if needed. "How did you know?" Margaret smiled. "Because you're glowing in a way that has nothing to do with hospital fluorescent lighting. And because there's a very handsome, very worried man pacing outside my room who looks at you like you hung the moon." "Mom." "Elena, listen to me." Margaret's grip on her hand tightened with surprising strength. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't use my death as an excuse to stop living. Don't hide behind grief or guilt or fear. That man out there, he cares about you. I can see it from here. Don't push him away because you think you don't deserve happiness." Elena's tears finally spilled over. "I can't lose you. You're not losing me, sweetheart. You're carrying me with you. Every time you choose courage over comfort, every time you help someone who needs it, every time you love someone despite the risk, that's me, living on in you." They talked quietly for another hour, sharing memories and making peace with things that couldn't be changed. When Margaret finally drifted off to sleep, Elena stepped into the hallway where Leonard waited. He didn't say anything, just opened his arms. Elena walked into them and let herself fall apart completely. Leonard held her while she sobbed against his chest, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring words of comfort that she couldn't quite hear but felt nonetheless. When her tears finally slowed, she pulled back to look at him. "I'm sorry," she said. "This isn't exactly how I imagined our first I love you ending." Leonard's smile was soft and sad. "Life rarely goes according to plan. I should stay here tonight, with her." "Of course. I'll stay too." Elena looked at this man who'd confessed his love for her in a small park just hours ago, who was now offering to spend the night in uncomfortable hospital chairs because she needed him there. "You don't have to do that." "Elena," Leonard cupped her face gently, his thumb wiping away a stray tear. "Where else would I be?" They spent the night taking turns holding vigil, drinking terrible coffee from vending machines and talking in whispers about everything and nothing. Elena told Leonard stories about her childhood, how her mother had worked double shifts to afford ballet lessons Elena had quit after 3 weeks, How Margaret had taught her to change a tire and balance a checkbook and never accept less than she deserved. Leonard shared memories of his grandmother, the only person who'd ever made him feel unconditionally loved. How she'd died when he was 15, leaving him alone with parents who viewed him as a business investment rather than a son. "That's when I learned to build walls," Leonard said as dawnlight crept through the hospital windows. "After she died, it just seemed easier to keep everyone at a distance." "What changed?" Elena asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Leonard looked at her with those gray eyes that at first seemed so cold but now felt like home. "You walked into my conference room and scattered papers everywhere, and suddenly keeping everyone at a distance felt like the loneliest thing in the world." Margaret Faulkner passed peacefully 3 days later, with Elena holding one hand and Leonard holding the other. Her last words were, "Be brave, sweetheart. Choose love." As Elena stood beside her mother's bed, surrounded by flowers from Leonard's garden and cards from co-workers who'd become friends, she realized that her mother's death wasn't just an ending. It was also a beginning. But first, she had to figure out if she was brave enough to follow her mother's final advice. Grief, Elena discovered, was a peculiar thing that made ordinary moments feel impossible. 2 weeks after her mother's funeral, Elena sat at her desk staring at quarterly reports that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. The numbers blurred together, meaningless figures on a screen that couldn't compete with the constant ache in her chest. Leonard had given her all the time she needed, but Elena had insisted on returning to work. Sitting at home in her small apartment only made the silence louder, made her mother's absence feel like a physical weight pressing against her lungs. "Elena?" Leonard's voice was gentle as he approached her desk. "How are you holding up?" It was the same question everyone had been asking for days, and Elena had perfected her standard response. "I'm managing. Thank you for asking." But when she looked up at Leonard, this man who'd held her hand through the longest night of her life, who'd arranged for her mother's favorite flowers at the funeral, who'd somehow managed to be exactly what she needed without her having to ask. The carefully constructed walls around her grief began to crumble. "I can't remember what her voice sounded like," Elena whispered, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. "It's only been 2 weeks and I'm already forgetting." Leonard's expression softened with understanding. Without a word, he pulled up the chair across from her desk and sat down, creating a pocket of privacy in the bustling office. "Tell me about her laugh," he said. Elena blinked, surprised by the request. Her laugh? Was it loud? Quiet? Did she snort when something was really funny? A small smile tugged at Elena's lips despite herself. She snorted, every time, and she'd get embarrassed about it, which would just make her laugh harder. What else? She hummed when she cooked. Off-key, always off-key, and she talked to herself when she was concentrating like she was having a full conversation with an invisible person. Leonard smiled. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Elena's voice caught. "Leonard, I don't know how to do this. How to keep going without her. You don't have to figure it all out today," he said gently. "You just have to make it through today. And then tomorrow, you make it through tomorrow." Elena looked at this man who'd somehow become her anchor in the storm of grief, and felt something shift in her chest. Not the sharp pain of loss, but something softer. Gratitude, maybe, or the tentative recognition that love could coexist with sorrow. "I keep thinking about what she said in the hospital," Elena said. "About choosing love." Leonard's hands stilled on his coffee cup. "What about it?" "She was right. About you looking at me like I hung the moon." Elena met his eyes, seeing the careful hope he was trying to hide. "The question is, what do I do with that? What do you want to do with it?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Leonard's face. The sharp angles that had once seemed cold but now felt familiar. The gray eyes that had learned to be gentle. The mouth that had whispered comfort during her darkest hours. "I want to be brave," she said finally, "the way she taught me to be. But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of everything. Of this being too good to be true. Of losing someone else I love. Of not being enough for someone like you." Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Of choosing wrong and regretting it for the rest of my life." Leonard leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Elena, look at me." She raised her eyes to his. "There is no guarantee in this world except that everything ends eventually. Your mother knew that better than anyone. She was a nurse. She saw it every day. But she also knew that the fear of ending doesn't have to stop us from beginning. How do you know what she knew? Because she raised you, and you're the bravest person I've ever met." Elena felt tears threaten again, but these were different. Not the sharp tears of grief, but something warmer. "I don't feel brave," You came back to work when staying home would have been easier. You're sitting here having this conversation when avoiding it would have been safer. You're choosing to feel everything instead of numbing it. Leonard's voice was soft but certain. That's not just brave, Elena. That's extraordinary. Elena's phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Leonard's 3 o'clock meeting with potential investors from Tokyo. The ordinary intrusion of work felt jarring after the intimacy of their conversation. You have the Yamamoto meeting, she said, automatically shifting back into professional mode. Cancel it. Elena stared at him. What? Cancel the meeting. Reschedule it. Do whatever you need to do. Leonard stood, extending his hand to her. Right now, there's somewhere we need to be. Where? The place where your mother taught you to be brave. Elena looked at Leonard's outstretched hand, thinking about choices and courage and her mother's voice telling her to choose love. She thought about the man who'd sat with her through the worst night of her life, who'd seen her at her most broken and hadn't looked away. She took his hand. 20 minutes later, they stood in the small cemetery where Margaret Faulkner was buried beneath a simple headstone that read, "Beloved Mother and Friend." Elena hadn't been back since the funeral, hadn't been ready to face the finality of carved stone and turned earth. But with Leonard beside her, it felt different. Less like an ending and more like a conversation. "Hi, Mom," Elena said softly, kneeling to place fresh flowers by the headstone. "I brought someone to meet you. Officially, I mean." Leonard stood quietly behind her, giving her space to grieve and remember and say whatever she needed to say. "I think you'd like him," Elena continued. "He's stubborn like you were, and he sees the best in people, even when they can't see it themselves. Especially then." Elena stood, turning to face Leonard with tears in her eyes but something like peace in her expression. "I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" Elena stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Ready to choose love," she said. "Ready to be brave." Leonard's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. "Are you sure?" Elena looked back at her mother's grave, then at the man who'd become her safe harbor in the storm of grief and change and unexpected hope. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." But as Leonard leaned down to kiss her, Elena's phone rang with a call that would test just how brave she was willing to be. The call that shattered their perfect moment came from the last person Elena expected to hear from. "Elena Faulkner?" The voice was crisp, professional, and vaguely familiar. "This is Victoria Hayes from Corporate Solutions Weekly. I'm calling regarding your relationship with Leonard Whitmore." Elena's blood turned to ice. She stepped away from Leonard, phone pressed tightly to her ear as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "I'm a journalist investigating workplace relationships at major corporations, specifically the relationship between CEOs and their employees. I have sources confirming that Mr. Whitmore has been financially supporting you and your family, and that you two have been seen together outside of work hours." Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Leonard was watching her with growing concern, clearly sensing something was wrong. "I don't know what you're talking about," Elena said carefully. "Miss Faulkner, I have photographs of you and Mr. Whitmore having dinner at Nona's in Brooklyn 3 weeks ago. I have bank records showing a $50,000 transfer from Whitmore Tech to your personal account, and I have testimony from former employees suggesting this isn't the first time Mr. Whitmore has engaged in inappropriate relationships with staff members." Elena's world tilted sideways. Former employees? 3 previous assistants who claimed they were fired after refusing Mr. Whitmore's advances. They paint a picture of a man who uses his position of power to coerce vulnerable women into relationships. "That's not," Elena started, then stopped. How could she explain that Leonard had never coerced her into anything, that he'd saved her mother's life, that what existed between them was real and honest, and nothing like what this woman was describing? "Miss Faulkner, I'm going to print this story with or without your comment, but I thought you deserved the chance to tell your side." Elena's hands were shaking as she ended the call. Leonard was beside her instantly, his face pale with concern. "What's wrong?" Elena looked at this man she'd just promised to choose, this man who'd held her through her mother's death and made her believe in love again, and felt everything crumbling around her. "There's a reporter. She has photos of us. She has information about the money you gave me for my mother's treatment. She's writing a story about you. About us." Leonard's expression went carefully blank, the corporate mask sliding back into place. "What kind of story?" "She says you have a pattern of pressuring employees into relationships, that there are other women who—" "That's not true." Leonard's voice was sharp, definitive, Elena, whatever they told her, it's not true. But the photos are real. The bank transfer is real. How do I explain that to the world? How do I make people understand that you weren't taking advantage of me? Leonard ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked lost. I don't know. Elena stared at him, watching this powerful man, who'd built an empire, who commanded boardrooms full of millionaires, admit that he was helpless against the court of public opinion. This will destroy you, she said quietly. I don't care about that. You should. You've worked your entire life to build this company, this reputation. I won't be the reason you lose it all. Leonard's eyes snapped to hers, sharp with understanding and growing panic. Elena, what are you saying? I'm saying maybe this was a mistake. Maybe we moved too fast, let our emotions cloud our judgment, maybe. No. Leonard's voice was fierce, desperate. Don't do this. Don't let them win by making you doubt what we have. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. What do we have, Leonard, really? Take away the money, the dramatic rescue, the grief that made me vulnerable. What's left? Love, he said simply. What's left is love. Is it? Or is it just two lonely people who found each other at the right moment? Leonard stepped closer, his hands cupping her face with desperate gentleness. Elena, listen to me. I have loved exactly one person in my entire adult life, and that person is standing right in front of me, trying to convince herself that what we feel isn't real. How can you be sure? Because before you, I didn't even remember what hope felt like. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because when your mother was dying, you didn't just let me help. You let me be part of something that mattered. Leonard's voice cracked with emotion. Because I would rather face 1,000 scandals with you than spend one day without you. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Stay with Leonard, and potentially destroy everything he'd worked for. Leave him and destroy the only real love either of them had ever known. What if the story ruins everything? She whispered. Then we'll deal with it together. What if people think I'm just a gold digger who seduced her boss? Then they don't know you at all. Elena opened her eyes, looking into Leonard's face. This face that had become home to her, that had seen her at her worst and chosen to stay anyway. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. Leonard's smile was shaky but real. But remember what your mother said? Be brave. Choose love. Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, exactly, but resolution. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop fighting against your own heart. Okay, she said quietly. Okay? Okay, let's be brave, let's choose love. Let's face whatever comes next together. Leonard's relief was so profound it was almost painful to watch. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious and fragile and absolutely essential. Whatever happens, he murmured against her hair, we'll get through it. Elena held him back, thinking about her mother's final words and the choice between comfort and courage. As Leonard's phone began ringing, probably more reporters, more questions, more complications, Elena realized that love wasn't about finding someone who made life easier. It was about finding someone worth fighting for. But as the first news van pulled up outside the cemetery, Elena wondered if love would be enough to survive what was coming next. The story broke on a Tuesday morning with all the subtlety of a nuclear explosion. Elena woke to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and her face plastered across the front page of Corporate Solutions Weekly with the headline, Power, Money, and Manipulation, Inside the Whitmore Scandal. The article painted her as either a calculated gold digger or a naive victim, depending on which paragraph you read. Leonard was portrayed as a predatory billionaire who used his wealth and position to exploit vulnerable women. The accompanying photos, grainy shots of them at the restaurant leaving the hospital together, holding hands at her mother's funeral, felt like violations of the most intimate moments of her life. Elena's phone rang. Leonard, don't read it, he said without preamble. Too late. Elena stared at the newspaper spread across her kitchen table, feeling nauseated. Leonard, they interviewed your ex-wife. Silence. Then, what did she say? Elena's voice caught as she read the highlighted quote. Leonard Whitmore is a man who confuses ownership with love. He doesn't have relationships. He has acquisitions. Elena, you have to know that's not. I know. Elena's voice was steady, surprising them both. I know because I've seen how you love. It's nothing like what they're describing. Are you okay? Elena looked around her small apartment, at the flowers Leonard had brought her last week, still fresh in a vase by the window, at the photo of her mother on the nightstand, smiling in eternal encouragement. At the life she'd built that was about to be dissected by strangers with cameras and opinions. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm not running. Elena, I'm not running, Leonard. From this, from you, from whatever comes next. But we need to fight back." "How?" Elena thought about her mother's words, "Be brave, choose love," and felt something steel-hard form in her chest. By telling the truth. All of it. 2 hours later, Elena stood outside the offices of Corporate Solutions Weekly, wearing her best dress and carrying a folder full of documents. Leonard had wanted to come with her, but Elena knew this was something she had to do alone. Victoria Hayes was younger than Elena had expected, with sharp eyes and the kind of aggressive confidence that came from breaking stories that ruined lives. "Miss Faulkner," Victoria said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I'm surprised you wanted to meet in person. I wanted to look you in the eye when I tell you how wrong you got it." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Elena opened her folder and placed a stack of papers on the desk. "These are my mother's medical records. Stage 3 lung cancer, diagnosed 6 months ago. Terminal." Victoria glanced at the documents, her expression shifting slightly. "This," Elena continued, placing another document on the desk, "is the receipt for her treatment at St. Mary's Hospital. $50,000 that Leonard transferred not to buy my affections but to save my mother's life. That doesn't change the fact that—" "This," Elena interrupted, placing a final document on the desk, "is my resignation letter, dated the day before Leonard and I went to dinner. I was planning to quit, Victoria. I was going to leave my job and find something else because I was falling in love with him, and I knew it was inappropriate." Victoria picked up the resignation letter, scanning it quickly. Elena could see the reporter's narrative crumbling in real time. "I never submitted it," Elena continued, "because Leonard convinced me that what we felt for each other was worth fighting for. Not because he coerced me, or manipulated me, or used his position against me, but because he saw a woman who was drowning and threw her a lifeline. The other women who came forward lied." Elena's voice was calm, but implacable. "And I can prove it." Elena placed a final folder on the desk. "These are testimonials from every employee who's worked directly with Leonard in the past 5 years. Voluntary statements from people who have nothing to gain by defending him. Read them." Victoria opened the folder, her confidence wavering as she read page after page of testimonials describing Leonard as demanding but fair, exacting but never inappropriate, professional, to a fault. "The 3 women who spoke to you," Elena continued. "Jessica Morrison was fired for embezzling company funds. Sarah Chen was let go for violating confidentiality agreements. Amanda Rodriguez quit after 2 days because she couldn't handle the workload. None of them were fired for refusing Leonard's advances, because Leonard never made any advances." Victoria set down the papers, looking less certain than she had moments before. "Why should I believe you?" Elena leaned forward, her blue eyes blazing with conviction. "Because I'm the only person in this whole mess who has nothing to lose by telling the truth. My mother is dead. My relationship with Leonard is already public. My reputation is already in ruins. The only thing I have left is my integrity, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else take that away from me." Elena stood, gathering her documents. "You can print whatever story you want, Victoria, but you'll be printing lies, and eventually the truth will come out. It always does." As Elena walked toward the door, Victoria called after her. "Why defend him? Even if everything you're saying is true, this scandal could destroy both of you. Wouldn't it be easier to just walk away?" Elena turned back, thinking of her mother's final words, of Leonard's confession in the small park, of the choice between comfort and courage that defined every meaningful moment in life. "Because love isn't supposed to be easy," Elena said quietly. "It's supposed to be worth it." The follow-up story ran 3 days later with the headline, "Setting the Record Straight, the Real Story Behind the Whitmore Allegations." Victoria Hayes had done her homework this time, interviewing real sources, checking actual facts, painting a picture of a love story that had survived grief and scandal and public scrutiny. Elena found Leonard in his office late that Friday evening, standing by the window that overlooked the city. He looked tired but peaceful, like a man who'd survived a war and was finally allowing himself to believe it was over. "So," Elena said, closing the door behind her, "how does it feel to have your reputation restored?" Leonard turned, his smile soft and real, like "I can finally breathe again." Elena walked to him, sliding her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. "What happens now?" "Now?" Leonard's arms came around her, solid and sure. "Now we have the rest of our lives to figure out." Elena looked up at him. This man who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who'd stood by her through scandal and grief and the kind of public scrutiny that destroyed weaker relationships. "I love you," she said, the words carrying the weight of everything they'd survived together. "I love you too," Leonard replied, leaning down to finally kiss her the way he'd wanted to since that first day she'd scattered papers across his conference room floor. As the city sparkled below them, and their future stretched out like an unwritten story, Elena realized that her mother had been right about everything. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose love, even when, especially when, the whole world is watching. Where love lives 1 year later. Elena stood in the doorway of classroom 3B at Roosevelt Elementary School, watching 26 third graders attempt to build marshmallow towers with spaghetti sticks. The controlled chaos was exactly the kind of beautiful mess she'd always imagined teaching would be. "Miss Elena," 7-year-old Maya called out, waving a precariously balanced creation. "Look, mine's taller than Tommy's." Elena smiled, walking over to examine the architectural marvel that defied several laws of physics. "That's amazing, Maya. What do you think makes it so strong?" "The marshmallows are like glue," Maya explained seriously. "They hold everything together even when it gets wobbly." Elena's heart squeezed with the simple wisdom of children. "That's very smart thinking." Her phone buzzed with a text from Leonard. "How's your first week going?" "Missing you." Elena typed back, "Perfect chaos. The best kind. See you tonight." She'd taken the teaching position 3 months ago, finally pursuing the dream she'd abandoned after her father's death. Leonard had been the one to encourage her, pointing out that Whitmore Tech's education initiative needed someone who understood both business and children. Elena suspected he'd created the position specifically for her, but she'd learned to accept Leonard's quiet acts of love without arguing. The scandal had faded, as scandals do, replaced by newer controversies and shinier objects for public consumption. Elena and Leonard had emerged stronger, their relationship tested by fire and proven unbreakable. The marriage proposal had come 6 months later, in the same small park where Leonard first told her he was falling in love with her. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Maya's voice interrupted Elena's thoughts. "Are you getting married soon?" Elena smiled at the ring on her finger, a simple platinum band with a single diamond that caught the afternoon light. "Very soon, next month. Will you have babies?" "Maybe someday." "Will you still be our teacher?" Elena knelt down to Maya's level, thinking about the future she and Leonard had planned together, the foundation they were starting in her mother's memory, the schools they hoped to build, the children they might have someday. "I'll always be your teacher," Elena said, "even when you're all grown up." At 5 o'clock, Elena gathered her things and headed for the parking lot where Leonard waited, leaning against his car with a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorites, though she'd never told him that. He just paid attention to the way her face lit up when she saw them in flower shops. "How was day 1 of your new career?" he asked, kissing her softly. "Messy, loud, absolutely perfect." Elena accepted the flowers, breathing in their sunny scent. "How was your day of running a billion-dollar corporation?" "Boring without you there to spill coffee on important documents." Elena laughed, the sound bright and free. "I only did that once. Once was enough to change my entire life." They drove through the city as the sun set behind glass towers and busy streets, talking about Elena's students and Leonard's meetings, and the 1,000 small details that make up a shared life. When they stopped at a red light, Leonard reached over and took Elena's hand. "I have something for you," he said. "It's not my birthday, or our anniversary, or any special occasion that I'm forgetting, is it?" Leonard smiled mysteriously, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Open it." Elena unfolded the paper inside, scanning the official letterwork with growing wonder. "Leonard, this is the deed to your mother's house. I bought it back from the bank." Leonard's voice was soft, uncertain. "I thought maybe we could live there after we're married. Make new memories in the place where your best memories began." Elena stared at the document, remembering the small house where she'd learned to ride bikes and bake cookies and believe in love. The house they'd lost when her mother got sick, sold to pay for treatments that hadn't been enough. "You bought my childhood home. I bought our future home if you want it." Elena looked at this man who'd seen every corner of her heart and loved all of it. The messy parts, the broken parts, the parts that dreamed impossible dreams and believed in second chances. "Leonard Whitmore," she said, tears blurring her vision. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Leonard replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "We found each other right when we needed each other most." As they pulled into the driveway of the small blue house with white shutters and a front porch that had witnessed 1,000 sunset conversations, Elena felt her mother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. Be brave, sweetheart. Choose love. Elena had chosen love. Had chosen it every day since that first morning when she'd walked into Leonard Whitmore's office and accidentally changed both their lives forever. She'd chosen it through grief and scandal, and the terrifying vulnerability of letting someone see all her broken places. And love had chosen her back. Inside the house that smelled like fresh paint and possibility, Leonard showed Elena the renovations he'd secretly been planning. The reading nook by the front window where she could grade papers, the kitchen island where they could cook together, the small room upstairs that could be a nursery someday, if they were blessed with children. It's perfect, Elena whispered, standing in the living room where her mother had taught her to dance to old records and dream big dreams. We're perfect, Leonard corrected gently, pulling her into his arms. Perfectly imperfect, perfectly real, perfectly us. As Elena looked around the house where her love story had really begun, not with spilled coffee or corporate meetings, but with a little girl learning from her mother that the bravest people are the ones who choose love even when it's scary, she realized that some fairy tales don't end with castles and kingdoms. The best ones end with coming home. Thank you for joining Elena and Leonard's journey. Their story reminds us that true love isn't about perfection. It's about finding someone who sees your chaos and chooses to stay anyway. What did their story teach you about choosing courage over comfort? Would you have been brave enough to fight for love the way Elena did? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.